You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
I want to welcome from the Washington Examiner, Betsy Woodruff. Betsy, it's great to have you on the program with Brett and John Rappaport on the Final Say. Welcome.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, I've been doing this all day. Every time I speak of Bob McDonnell, I always say McConnell. And, I guess it's easy to do. Both,
I've been doing that
in this
too.
area.
It's really bad.
In this area, two popular guys, and so it's certainly easier for us to keep doing that. But I think this is really a fascinating story for numerous reasons for me. If you go back a few years, I can recall, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was 2010 that Bob McDonnell, at the time governor of Virginia, gave a speech. It was a fantastic speech. All of a sudden, he's in consideration for, a possible VP spot. Some people say, hey, one day he can make a president. And, he's almost like a rising star. And then you see some interesting politics between he and Ken Cuccinelli and others, throughout these various races. And then, of course, Ken Cuccinelli recently losing to McCarthy. And then we get all the news of these, the scandal and the corruption and the things. And of course, we get this verdict. But you've written a piece here in the Washington Examiner yesterday, and you can find it from yesterday. It's entitled Lawmaker, McDonnell Verdict Won't Stick. But I think you could certainly tell us more about the piece than me just reading it from you.
Yeah, without a doubt. The McDonnell situation is so unusual and interesting. And his case itself is definitely something that could be interesting in an appeal trial. His attorney told reporters yesterday that they will appeal. They're hoping to take this to a higher court. And essentially, the defense that they make is that there's not a proven quid pro quo. In order to prove corruption charges, the Supreme Court has been very clear that you have to show that one party gave something to another party in exchange for another specific thing. And McDonnell's attorneys, I think, can expect to argue in appeal that there's no proof that happened. But there's plenty of proof that Johnny Williams, the CEO of this company, Star Scientific, had a relationship with the McDonnell family that was very questionable. Gave them lavish gifts, I think over about $165,000 worth in gifts and loans, was very close with McDonnell's wife in a way that certainly seems untowered, but that's not necessarily illegal. Now, McDonnell, as governor, certainly helped Johnny Williams, but McDonnell and his attorneys can argue that was what governors do for businesses. Governors try to help out businessmen, businesswomen in their state, and that nothing McDonnell specifically did for Johnny Williams, they'll argue, is something he wouldn't have done for other business people. So is McDonnell Boy Scout of the Year? Probably not. But that doesn't mean his attorneys don't have grounds for an appeal.
Yeah, well, I'd argue are any of these guys Boy Scouts? I mean, some obviously are, but I don't know. This is politics. But this story, in a way, reminds me of Tom DeLay and that fiasco. And, of course, that was overturned. And, it's just these are always, of course, fascinating and interesting stories. And I think a lot of this is politically driven. I think the way, it depends on who's prosecuting him, what district it is, and there are a lot more factors here than the actual truth or the facts of what happened.
Yeah, and I spoke with Delegate Dick Black, who is a state senator from Northern Virginia, for the story that I wrote, and he's a conservative Republican. He's certainly more conservative than McDonnell might be considered. McDonnell is more of a center-right, moderately conservative, while Dick Black is very conservative. But Dick Black said that even though he and McDonnell have had vociferous disagreements, that he thought the case against McDonnell was politically driven. And he said he thinks there's a trend of these prosecutions targeting politically ascendant Republicans. I don't know if that's true. I can't opine on that. I'm a reporter. But this is a case that Republicans are making, and I think we can expect to hear this case going forward.
Betsy, I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's actually a very important consideration is trying to understand and look at the trends both for who they're going after, when they're going after them, and what their positions are, as you say. Are they ascending people in the party? I mean, no case is probably more of a poster child for that than what they just did to the governor of Texas. I mean, it's hard to, it's almost like the makings of a really sad, sick B movie that you need to, knock down a case of beer, in order to get through it. And yet it's reality. And here's the thing that I find odd is you can almost say the biggest problem here is really transparency, because the entirety, even the act of politicking itself is all about horse trading. I mean, think about it. Two congressmen or two senators, they sit there all day long, and they basically barter and trade votes. Well, I'll give you my vote on this if you give me your 2 votes on these 2 small issues. I mean, how is that any different? To me, what it really should come down to is we need to have full and complete filing transparency, make less things illegal, but expose more things so that people understand what's going on, and make the worst crime to be doing things that are not transparent, get caught not filing things or not disclosing that I had dinner here, I did this there, and let the people decide whether or not it's untowardly or unethical. And if that's the case, then let them vote you out.
Yeah, and that's a case that I think we hear conservatives making more and more, especially when we talk about larger national campaign contribution laws. Something that I think we're going to hear increasingly is the argument that there should be unlimited campaign donations, but they should all be revealed. So if you're donating to someone, you need to say who your donors are. If you're donating to a super PAC, you need to say who you are, how much you're giving this super PAC, so that people have more knowledge of who's doing the political speaking that we're talking about. And progressives tend to take a different tack and argue that there should be limits on how much can be given. Virginia has just passed some ethics laws that affect how these donations work. A number of states have caps on how much people can donate to governors. And it's interesting. It's sort of these two opposite ways of talking about reforming this campaign stuff.
Well, it's very simple. If you look at what happens here, each party has their own agenda, and this is the problem I have. It's one thing to have an agenda where you're trying to push policy, but when you have one party that says, well, we're not allowed to have these huge campaign contributions, right, because that's evil, but we could force people to lose the right to privacy votes within a union confines, and then the union can put as much money in as possible. I think it's ridiculous, and I think it's a huge problem. Feel free to comment on that, but I have one quick question before I hand you back off to Brett. As you look at this case, have you seen and were you able to compare this to any other cases in the last couple of years where you might have a little bit of insight into the direction we may see it go?
I can't speak to that in terms of precedent, although I can say that McDonnell's attorneys seem pretty confident that they'll be able to make a strong case that there was not a quid pro quo and therefore that the corruption charges shouldn't stand. I know the Supreme Court has ruled on this kind of thing before, but I don't have the name of that case at the tip of my tongue.
I think I said McCarthy before. I meant Terry McAuliffe. So if I did say that, the Terry McAuliffe beat Ken Cuccinelli, and what was interesting in that race is no one won by 50%. You had the interesting Robert Sarvis was the Libertarian candidate who was way behind, but obviously took votes from someone. We could argue all day long who they came from, but regardless, it's an interesting state because it's in play. I believe, you don't know what's going to happen throughout the governorship of McAuliffe. Maybe it swings back Republican. Maybe it stays in the hands of the Democrats, at least the governorship for a cycle or two. We don't know. But certainly the end result of this corruption story will have a lot, I think, to say about that. But one thing that I noticed is Terry McAuliffe is someone who's been involved in so many campaigns as a fundraiser, and he's been in the background of so many of these things. I wouldn't be surprised if you really looked into him, or if we already have, because I believe we've discussed this before over the years, that you would find similar things in his background that they just found Governor Bob McDonnell guilty of.
I imagine that is a very realistic expectation. Terry McAuliffe certainly does not have the best reputation of political operatives. And I think, what you were touching on a little bit earlier, the impact of this trial on Virginia state politics is really, really important. I mean, in Virginia state politics, and I'm from Virginia, my family's lived there for years, not claiming any sort of magical Gnostic insight, but I know the state fairly well. And in Virginia state politics, within the Republican Party and the conservative movement, there's basically two sectors. One sector is sort of your grassroots activist types. You get a lot of homeschoolers, you get a lot of evangelical Christians, you get conservative Catholics, you get libertarians, you get Tea Party, some sort of pre-Tea Party folks. And this activist strain in the Virginia conservative movement has been around before the Tea Party. It's a long-time part of Virginia conservatism. But then you also have more establishment Republicans. You've got Bill Bolling. You've got the more Richmond types. You've got Eric Cantor and Eric Cantor's allies. These are people who tend to be less socially conservative, more business-oriented, don't really want to talk about abortion and gay marriage. And these two groups historically are just at each other's throats. They're not friends. They don't like the same people. They don't want to buddy up with each other. But McDonnell was really important because he was the rare candidate who liked both of them. He had credibility with the social conservatives and the activists because of his Catholicism, which by all accounts, he's a devout, serious Catholic. But he also had credibility with the business, sensible, savvy types. He wanted somebody who, would look good in campaign commercials and who could talk to people who went to Ivy League schools. So the fact that McDonnell wasn't an asset for Ken Cuccinelli when he was running for governor was an enormous loss for Ken Cuccinelli's campaign. And it's a big loss for Virginia Republican politics going forward, just because McDonnell was very much a bridge builder. So losing him, I think, has repercussions for state politics for years.
Yeah, interesting thought. John and I were actually in the 2012 election. We were in Richmond with the numerous campaigns that were there. And we covered it on Radio Row, and of course we had friends who worked with the various campaigns, and not everyone won, and of course the presidency went the wrong way. But you could just see the dynamics of the Virginia politics, and of course you're talking about one of the oldest, longest-running states, a state that has produced so many famous people, and I think we'll be talking about Virginia politics till the end of time, really.
Especially given how it's become a swing state for presidential elections. I mean, it's basically the new Ohio.
Yeah, great point. And in a sense, it's a good thing. I think it's good. Let me just step back for a second. In normal times, if we didn't have such an extreme party, in my opinion, the Democrat wing, because it's swung so far to the left, I think it's good to have a handful of states that are always back and forth because it keeps everything honest. But unfortunately, I think, the pendulum has shifted so far to the left that we're getting ourselves out of control. And you see it with the, just totally out of control deficits and budgets and we can't possibly come up with enough money. We can't raise enough in taxes and so on and so forth. So, I have to be careful about wishing for that the state's up in play, but I certainly do think that it helps weed out corruption and things of that nature because when you're not, it's not a given that you're going to win every election. You do have to play by a different set of rules, I believe.
Sure thing. And just from the perspective of a Washington national politics reporter, Virginia being politically competitive is great for business because it's so easy to cover. It's not like I have to get on a plane or get on a train. I can just hop on I-95 and get down to Richmond in like 2 hours. The Barbara Comstock's race in Northern Virginia is one of the most competitive of this cycle, and you have the entire D.C. press corps that can just bop over for an afternoon, interview her, and write about it. So
wait a minute. What time do you get on the road? Sorry, I was going to say, what time do you get on the road that you can head south on 95 of D.C. and get anywhere in 2 hours?
Yeah, seriously. Knock on wood, man.
So, any sense of when we'll hear more about the appeal of this case, how long that might take to be back in the courts, I guess?
I really don't know. I'm not sure what the timeline is here. The attorneys have said they're going to appeal, so I imagine we'll get more details in the coming months. And it seems like they have pretty good grounds for an appeal, so I'm fairly confident that another court will take it up. But as far as when specifically to expect that, I don't know that I can make a prediction.
Well, it's just be interesting to see when it falls out in terms of future elections, and hopefully it doesn't interfere with. Hopefully it doesn't interfere with that.
Sure thing.
Betsy, just a quick question. It's completely not related, but the president's back to work, I hope. Or actually, I'm not sure I hope. But The president took a vacation. A lot of very troubling things, both domestically and with regards to foreign policy going on. But as being part of the press and the media there, do you get a sense that a lot of your fellow media, writers and journalists are a little concerned by what they're seeing from this White House?
I think there is more criticism towards the White House, and I think people are probably more comfortable snarking at the president. I think people are increasingly comfortable getting in, for instance, Twitter fights with White House slacks. I think people are more comfortable kind of making fun of him, needling him. Maybe in the past he's sort of been a sacred cow, for lack of a more precise term. But now I think you see people getting more miffed and more frustrated, and feeling more comfortable kind of letting that vent.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing, because I always believe that journalists and the media should just cover things fairly and always be the watchdog to help protect the American people. And it seems like this president has gotten away with more than I've ever seen any president, at least in my lifetime. Yeah,
and it's especially important because the challenge of being a reporter in D.C. is that, on the one hand, the longer you're in D.C., the better you understand it, the more you know about who you need to talk to, and the more you understand the inner workings of Congress and parliamentary procedure and stuff. And that experience is really valuable, and it's a big advantage. But on the other hand, the longer you're in D.C., the more you might have personal relationships that affect your coverage, and the cozier you might get with slacks, and the more you might see the senators and representatives that you interview as pals or as colleagues, instead of seeing them as power wielders who need to be held accountable, even if that hurts feelings or results in your editor getting angry phone calls. So it's a challenge. It's something that's interesting to balance, and I don't know, it just makes me excited to see so many new kind of experimental media outlets popping up. I think that's really valuable.
I would agree with that completely. Well, folks, first of all, Betsy Woodruff, thank you so much for joining John and I today. We really appreciate it. And, of course, folks, you can go to the Washington Examiner, check out Betsy Woodruff. You can find all of the articles and things that she works on. But your Twitter handle is Woodruff Bets, and how did you come up with that one?
I know, right? It's so weird. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Oh, you're welcome, and we'll be sure to put out your articles as we follow them, as we do all the fine people at the Washington Examiner. So, again, thank you.
Sounds good.
All right, take care.
You too.